Welcome back to another episode of Screen Stories. For this episode, we'll be discussing a game that's part of one of the most legendary series in gaming. Look up, folks, because I'm talking about Skyward Sword from the Legend of Zelda franchise. This is your host, Clare Rivetti.
And I'm your other host, Hakym.
Skyward Sword, like its fellow Legend of Zelda games, is an action-adventure game featuring dungeons to explore, puzzles to solve, and monsters to vanquish. You play as Link, the chosen hero of the goddess, and your mission, as per usual, is to save the world. We'll be talking about sacrifice, love, and the expanding scope of responsibilities. Sky, why don't you start us off by telling us about when you first played Skyward Sword?
Yeah, Skyward Sword was the first Zelda thing I've ever seen. I just remember being fascinated with what I saw back when I was like 11 or 12, just seeing these fabulous set pieces like islands in the sky and this boy going around slicing up monsters and skeletons and stuff like that. And in this game, you can actually control the very fine motions of the sword with the Wii remote, and it was just such a fascinating thing to see. I just had to get my hands on it, and it is a magical experience, truly.
Oh, for sure, yeah. As for myself, I played Twilight Princess before I played Skyward Sword, and I fell in love with both. So, just getting to experience the series from such different standpoints, I guess, was so interesting to see because they're vastly different in the tone of the game. Yeah. So it was really cool to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. Twilight Princess, it's so dark and can be so mysterious and gritty and whatnot. And Skyward Sword is so bright and adventurous and whatnot. And they also handle their stories incredibly differently.
For sure. So the story's pretty different, and also going back to the art, I read that the art in Skyward Sword was actually influenced by Impressionist and post-Impressionist painters. And I think that comes across really well when you're playing the game. It's got this very, artsy, lovely feel to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like Twilight Princess, Twilight Princess is definitely, I would say, the realist feeling. It can be interpreted as the heaviest story. And by comparison, Skyward Sword is kind of cel-shaded, not cartoony, no, but it's got this sort of simpler style of shading and lighting and stuff like that, and it doesn't have this sort of full realism as if it was some big next-gen title. And it really lends well to the game's whole, I would even say, narrative themes.
Yeah, it gives it a softer feeling.
Yeah.
Now we're going to tell you a bit about the game's overarching plot and how it did commercially. Skyward Sword is the chronological beginning of the Legend of Zelda series and follows our familiar protagonist Link as he journeys away from the floating island of Skyloft in order to rescue his childhood friend Zelda. It was first released in 2011 on the Wii, and an HD version of the game was released just earlier this year. The original release sold 3.41 million units worldwide by December of that year, and Skyward Sword HD sold 3.6 million units by September 2021. It was ranked among the best games for the Wii and won Best Game, Best Graphics, Best Sound, and Best Story at IGN's Best of 2011 awards. Sky, would you care to give us a general overview of Skyward Sword's plot?
Yeah, Skyward Sword, so a lot of the Zelda games follow this typical formula of Link, this ordinary kid waking up in this village, and he has to, for whatever reason, go on this quest to go through these dungeons across mountains, uniting people, and getting the Master Sword, which is the Blade of Evil's Bane, and getting the power of the Triforce, which is this holy power, and defeating some great evil and saving Princess Zelda. Every game in the series has followed this loose formula for about 25 years. I think this game was actually the 25th anniversary game.
It was.
Yeah. But the fascinating thing about this game is it kind of starts us off on a different note. Link wakes up, like, in his in Skyloft, which is this floating island in the sky, but he's like friends with Zelda, childhood friends, and we're just kind of experiencing and the equivalent of, like, small island life, but Zelda and Link are kind of just experiencing their childhood together, and like they're really close, and all the other villagers know that, until this giant tornado comes and rips Zelda away from Link down to the surface, and Link and Zelda are flying on these birds. They're like pet birds called loftwings, and they're her loftwing is stripped away from her and she's pulled down to the surface. So Link decides to go on this journey to basically go where no man has gone before, which is off of the island and falling down onto the surface. And on the surface world, it's like this, this abandoned surface where not many people are anymore, but we experience all these civilizations, meet all these people, and meet these villains, these very mysterious, handsome, devilish villains. Who want Zelda for some reason, and it's very difficult to accept that because she's our friend. Why do these giant, crazy, scary people want her? So Link goes through a lot of trials and tribulations trying to get Zelda back, and accepting the role that he plays into all of this madness as well. It's a very out of all of the Zelda games, Skyward Sword honestly kind of feels the most like a love story, because a lot of it is fueled by his, just desire to get Zelda back. It's really touching and kind of gives a sense of gravity to all of the exploration and duels and battles and stuff like that. All the Legend of Zelda classic stuff that you already know.
So, jumping off of that, I think you mentioned that Link and Zelda are childhood friends, actually, and this is a pretty big deal because, especially for those of you who maybe haven't picked up a Legend of Zelda game before, this is kind of the first time that they've had this relationship, like, right off the bat from the beginning, and the first time that they've been this close. If you take a look at other Legend of Zelda games in the series, so Twilight Princess, Link is basically trying to find the princess because it's his duty. It's part of this overarching plot to save the world, but there's not really a personal connection that he has with her. It's just that he is trying to save the world, trying to put an end to the evil, and in doing so, he has to talk to Princess Zelda and team up with her. And that's the connection they have. Now, in Breath of the Wild, which was released after Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda do have more of a personal connection, but it's not quite the same. They're definitely not childhood friends. What happens is he's assigned to be her knight, and through protecting her and through these years of seeing her through this calamity, they become closer and they eventually become friends. It definitely does not have the same dynamic where they both start out being very connected and very attached to each other. This is the only game where immediately as you jump in, you can tell that they are thick as thieves, basically. Mm-hmm. So, keeping all of this in mind, how would you say this new dynamic plays into Link's expanding responsibilities? And how would you define those responsibilities and their expansion throughout the game?
So, earlier when we were talking about how the art style kind of plays into the narrative themes, something that the game tells you, well, it doesn't really tell you, but it's very clear through Link's very expressive face. He's a very expressive young boy in this game. It's wonderful to see. It's very charming. Mm-hmm. Zelda and Link are flying out on their birds in the midst of the cloud sea, and while Zelda's talking to Link, Link's just kind of staring up at the sky, just kind of smiling and appreciating it. Then he closes his eyes and lets the breeze just kind of wash over his face. And you get a feeling instantly of what kind of Link this guy is. He always has his head in the clouds. I think that's one of the big key terms about Skyward Sword is Link has his head in the clouds, and when something is coming to rip Zelda away from him, he has to find his way to reality. So when Zelda is ripped away from him, it creates this scenario where for the first time in Link's life, like, he actually kind of takes a stand for himself, for what he wants and stuff like that. Before that, he was always bullied by the town bully, and he just kind of liked this girl, and everyone kind of liked him, and he had this very docile, dormant life. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, every Zelda game experiences, a Link waking up and giving up his life. But the amazing thing is that in all these other games, it's usually a destiny given to Link. In Ocarina of Time, an owl kind of grants him his destiny. In Majora's Mask, this creepy salesman says, like, oh, this is what you can do to save the world. In Skyward Sword, it's the girl that I like has been taken away from me. And regardless of everyone else being, like, wanting safety or just like, oh, things will work out or whatever, like, what are we gonna do, Link is the one who takes the initiative and says, I'm going to go down there and rescue her. And I think that it's really almost necessary for a silent protagonist to have to make up for the lack of speech with making these bold moves so that they're not just like an empty slate. I feel like in a lot of other Zelda games, it's like, oh, hey, I can see myself in this person, and this is the destiny that I'm supposed to embark on. Okay, me and Link, I guess we'll do that. But in this game, it's like, no, I am making a choice, and because of that choice, Link isn't just like an empty personality who's just kind of like, following his duties. That's a person who, like, genuinely wants something. He's yearning for something, and that's like the rule of movie writing. It's like an empty character who actively yearns for something. And I feel like that is... this is why, like, Skyward Sword is considered to be, like, regardless of what qualms people have about the gameplay, people consider Skyward Sword to have the absolute greatest Link, because it's this very personal connection that people can derive from him, because it's a very human emotion. It's, I want this girl, and that girl has been taken away from me for some higher purpose, like, I don't know, college. Right?
Yeah.
Or I want to be the best drummer that ever existed. It's like my relationship. I can't fit that in there. I kind of see an analogy between that and the story of Skyward Sword,
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying.
Yeah, especially because Zelda, when we finally meet Zelda on the topic of responsibilities and their expansion, by the time we've met Zelda halfway through the game, she has accepted her responsibilities. She's been on this crazy-ass journey already. Can I say ass?
Yeah.
She's been on this crazy-ass journey, and like, she's already seen so much. Link has too, but you can tell his head's always been on, I gotta save Zelda. By the time we reach her, she's a little changed. She's like, Link, like, you did all this for me, and that's really sweet, but this is bigger than us now. And it results in this really, really sad scene. This scene kind of forces Link to have a wake-up call of sorts. Some sense of paradigm shift in his life where he decides, not even decides, it's against his will, that, okay, I can't just, have my head in the clouds anymore. I can't just want this one very simple thing. I actually do have to accept this destiny of having to save the world. And I feel like there's a lot of really good stories out there that tap into the idea of what I personally want versus my responsibilities. We watched Spider-Man 2 the other day, and I feel like that. Wow.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It's a classic Peter Parker thing, and there is significance in this game being the first chronological game in the series, because I feel like every other Link is like already the kind of kid who's like, willing to accept, okay, I got this destiny, time to go do it, haha, do. But, like, where did that heroic spirit start?
Yeah. Yeah. So it starts with him just enjoying his life, then his responsibilities expand, and now he is on the path to finding Zelda and doing whatever he can to find Zelda. But after this meeting, like, he's found her, but his responsibilities expand further because he realizes that he can't do anything for Zelda until he accepts the responsibility of, you have to be the one to save the world, and you have to be the one to accept this big destiny that you are a part of. And that's how his responsibilities just keep expanding throughout the game. It's not just once or twice. It's a whole process.
Yeah, and I feel like there's actually, this is something I just kind of thought of, but how do you write a story where there is like this one lonely boy who just lives a docile village life, eventually slaying like the King of Darkness? In a lot of games, it's like, oh, I mean, that's just the destiny you have to go on. Haha. And like the kid just kind of accepts it. It's very, very Lord of the Rings, I guess. But I feel like in Skyward Sword, there's this sense of credibility established in this story by showing that Link genuinely doesn't really... That's not where his head's at, you know? The game doesn't really say that, like, oh, you have this kid who wants to embark on this. It takes halfway through the game and a lot of fighting that is done, like, for fun because it's cool to finally reach Zelda. And once we reach her and realize we can't have her yet, it's like, oh, damn. Now it's not fun in games anymore, and it's this kind of begrudging but understanding sort of emotion that Link experiences. It kind of makes the story make a little more sense in the best possible way, and it's all, of course, brought home by Link's very expressive facial expressions in this game. He's a wonderful Link. It's like Doctor Who. Everyone has their every incarnation has their own quirks and charms.
Yes, that's a good point. Okay, I think we've said pretty much everything that needs to be said about that. So we'll be right back with more screen stories after this quick break. Skyward Sword
is a chronological...
I'm gonna punch you.
Okay.
Okay. Skyward Sword.
I'm
gonna... Sky.
I am very rude.
You are, a little bit.
The rudest dude.
Oy vey. Are you gonna do it again? Or can I read?
Only one way to find out.
Oy vey. Skyward Sword... Okay.
See, now you can't use that take because it sounded like you were angry at nobody.
Well, I was just testing the waters. Just wanted to see what you would do.
Time to dive in.
Alright. Now that we've discussed Skyward Sword's plot and Link's expanding responsibilities, let's get back to the relationship between Link and Zelda. We want to talk about love and sacrifice and how those elements add to the game.
Yeah, we talked about sacrifice a good amount, but one thing I wanted to ask you, Clare Rivetti, is what exactly does Link go through in the game?
So we already touched on how he starts out as a very normal boy, head in the clouds type. One of the things that he does have to sacrifice is his quote-unquote normal life and the sort of everyday normality that other people get to have. So that's the first big sacrifice that he makes, is giving that up in order to go and search for Zelda.
Yeah, actually, if I can add to that, like, you know, the whole classic RPG thing of like, oh, in the beginning of the game we just fight like slimes and worms, and by the end of the game we killed God.
Yeah.
That's a kind of something in Skyward Sword too. It's like in the beginning of the game, I'm a knight in training and I want to pass my final exam.
Yes.
Right.
That's where it opens.
Yeah, and you end the game killing God. But it kind of works really well because it's like it shows you just how docile and dormant his life is to provide you with such a harsh contrast and the emotional impact it has on him.
Yeah.
It's a little less ridiculous than RPGs, the RPG example I gave, for better or for worse.
And then I think the other big sacrifice would be, so you mentioned a very sad scene in the game. That sad scene is when Zelda, in order to protect like the land and the future of everyone who lives there, she goes back in time and she goes into this crystallized state so that she, as the reincarnation of the goddess, can protect everyone through these thousands of years. And it means that Link and Zelda, cannot be together when they finally meet up after all this time of Link desperately trying to catch up to her. So that is definitely a huge sacrifice on Zelda's part, because she, even though she's recognized that she has these responsibilities and that she needs to carry them out, this is still a huge sacrifice for her, because she's not just the reincarnation of the goddess, she's also Zelda, the Zelda from Skyloft, who really loved Link. And she makes this sacrifice because she has to, and in doing so, Link then has to make another sacrifice of committing to becoming the hero of destiny, basically. So he now knows that there's no backing out. If he wants to save Zelda and be with her again, he can't just, half-ass things and sort of help along the way just by chance. He has to make a commitment he is going to be the one to vanquish the evil from the land. He is going to be the goddess's chosen hero. And in doing so, he also is sacrificing the time that he has with Zelda, because he doesn't know when they'll get to see each other again or what it will be like. But that is another major sacrifice that he still makes.
Absolutely. And I think that moment is made even more powerful by the fact that around this part of the game, Groose, we need to talk about Groose.
Oh, Groose is amazing. Best side character.
Groose is probably the single best side character in this freaking franchise.
Yes.
Groose is the bully. Groose is the bully who like teases Link. He's like, "You're stupid," and he has a huge crush on Zelda. Tries to beat the final exam so that he can have some alone time with Zelda. Link beats him. He's like, "No, you're dumb. I hate you. My hair's cooler than you." And so Link's just flash forward to 5 hours, 10 hours later in the games, and Link just goes back up to Skyloft, does a few things, goes back down to the surface, and Groose freaking jumps down from Skyloft, grabbing onto Link and coming to the surface with him. And it's like, what on earth? This isn't your place. And Groose kind of, I wish I remembered indeed. You've played it more recently than I have, but I just remember that Groose kind of exhibited all of a sudden this real genuine care for Zelda that wasn't just out of I like her, I want to be with her, but more so whatever danger she's in, I'm gonna make this machine that lobs bombs at people so I can protect her.
Yeah. He kind of goes through this existential crisis, because when he's on Skyloft, he's the big man, he's the strongest, he can do everything. And then when he follows Link... Yeah, he's Gaston, kind of. Not, yeah. I mean, maybe not as bad or misogynistic, but... but yeah, that's his role. And when he follows Link down from Skyloft, he finds that Link is actually doing all this stuff that Groose himself could never do. And Link is actively fighting against the evil that is plaguing the land. And there's some sort of battle that happens. I think what it is the big bad guy starts to wake up, and you have to, like, stop him from getting to where the, what's it called? You have to stop him from getting to the chapel or whatever.
Yeah, it's this big raging behemoth that regularly tries to break out of its seal, and that's the reason why Zelda crystallized herself to basically strengthen the seal on the beast before it reaches the chapel.
Yes, thank you for saying that. But you go through this fight, and Groose sees all of this and realizes he hadn't before when the granny who lived there told him that he couldn't help, or that he couldn't vanquish this demon, at least. Now he's seen it, and he realizes there's nothing he can do against that. And he just sort of has this little meltdown where he goes outside and he just pounds on the wall repeatedly, and he's like, I'm useless, there's nothing I can do, I wanted to save Zelda and I can't do anything. And you kind of leave him like that for a bit, but then eventually you go back, and that monster is again threatening. It's broken its seal, and you have to beat it back into its seal. And Groose, through encouragement from the granny, has somehow built this huge contraption in order to launch bombs at
the Groosinator.
Yeah, he calls it the Groosinator. It's basically a catapult for bombs, and he built this huge thing all by himself in order to help Link keep this evil at bay. At bay, yeah. So, it's just this amazing character building moment.
It's incredible. The reason I even wanted to bring Groose up when we were talking about Zelda kind of having to, seal herself away, is because I found that moment to be especially powerful, considering just recently we finally got Groose back. Groose, this guy who kind of reminds us of our Skyloft life. He kind of brings our, childhood days in the beginning of this game into the present as we remember what we are doing this all for. I think that's a really good storytelling technique to basically just, when you get caught up in the grand scheme of things, it's hard to remember, what's the thing we're doing this all for? And bringing back our old school bully who really likes Zelda and whatnot is a really good way of kind of reminding us. It makes it all that much more painful when we finally, with that refreshed memory and refreshed vigor to save Zelda, now with Groose by our side, who, went through all of this work, to have her seal herself away. It is very, very good story writing, and wow, it's really something.
For sure.
Because it's like, oh, hey, my childhood bully is now helping me seal off the behemoth. Cool. All right, I'm gonna save Zelda now. Zelda says, I'm the mortal reincarnation of this, grand protector of people and stuff, and I'm the reincarnated version of her, and I need to seal myself away to strengthen the seal and turn your sword into the master sword so you can slay it. And Link's out here like, what? I just
like, huh?
It's sad. Yeah, it's so sad. But and yeah, it's a crazy moment, but I think it's just the kind of storytelling that, it's really bold after 25 years of games which are decidedly more straightforward, and not even in a bad way. It's just you don't really play Zelda games for the intricate character writing. You play them because they're just awesome. You play them for just a vast adventure, It's very bold to reinterpret these new characters by kind of establishing, okay, what are these characters in 25 years? Link is the hero and accepting his destiny. Zelda's the princess who has to accept her destiny. But this is where it all starts. So how can we kind of with taking into account the roles that these characters have played in this franchise for decades, kind of incorporate that into their individual character writing? I feel like the end result is just the two of them living this village life, being reluctant to, do accept something greater than that, but eventually being forced to, one of them willingly, one of them forcefully. And it's really something. It's one of the things that I wish we got out of the next game in the series, which everyone, I think myself included, it's like one of the greatest games ever created, actually, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The one thing it doesn't really have is that kind of very intricate character writing that motivates you throughout the game.
Right.
It's like 11 out of 10 in every other aspect. But I think, just knowing that Skyward Sword had something that Skyward Sword was defined by that character writing, so much so that people wanted that game to be ported to the Nintendo Switch over and over again, and it did last year, as you said, and it's just wow. it's absolutely wonderful.
Yes, for sure. I want to get back to talking about Link's sacrifices. So do Link's sacrifices mean anything since they come from a silent protagonist in a game that's not entirely story-driven?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing, right? What does it matter if this character is experiencing sacrifices if they don't if it's not a character in a movie who talks, and a character who has these conversations with people and really affects things around them with their words and stuff like that? What does it matter the emotional stakes of this character who in all senses can be considered an empty vessel, right? So what if they have cute facial expressions? But first off, there's of course the one big decision that he makes, which is voluntarily embarking on his journey as opposed to having that destiny forced on him. That's really significant. It's also really interesting because the reason Zelda even chooses to embrace this grand destiny of sealing away evil and stuff like that is because she, over the course of the game, is actually being led around by, protected by this very cool, how would you describe Impa? I have no clue.
Impa is she sort of has almost bounty hunter vibes, but
That's
not really. That's definitely not what she is, but she's this very cool and capable person who is protecting Zelda. It's her sacred duty. If that helps.
Yeah, there you go. That's actually it. It's her sacred duty. And I think it's wonderful that, so Impa's the person who basically leads Zelda down the rabbit hole, as it were. Showing her these temples and the gate of time that Zelda eventually has to go through. And over the course of the journey, Link keeps trying to get Zelda back, and Impa's protecting Link and Zelda away from each other so that Zelda can fulfill her destiny, and it's crazy. Now, that is something that I would say the reason why it's so significant that Link has to make these sacrifices is because that extends to the player. The player themselves, through playing as Link, has these objectives marked for them, right? The player knows, I'm going to go into this temple, I'm going to beat this dungeon, I'm going to defeat the boss, and Zelda's going to be on the other side. Now, that happens 3 times, back to back, over the first 3 dungeons in the game. And every single one of those times, you are not rewarded with finding Zelda, but you do see, she left something behind, so she was definitely here. And your partner in the game, your partner basically rewards you with this some form of prophetic, legendary, sacred message that will help you further,
further your search.
Further your search, pursue the legend, becoming the hero, very inadvertently becoming the hero. And I think that's really cool because the game doesn't actually tell you that, in you going to all these temples and defeating these bosses, you'll become the hero. The game tells you this is where Zelda is, you know? You have this marker of Zelda's face on your map. This is where she was last seen. So the game kind of, creates this very smart analogy, in my opinion, between Link and the player by saying, this is where your girl is. And then, okay, maybe not, but you got stronger and you became more of a hero and you defeated all these monsters and this big creepy rock crab thing and this weird guy who licks it with his long snake tongue a lot. Like, hey, that's cool, right? And it's like, that's not what I want. I mean, it's cool, but it's not what I'm fighting for. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly, I feel like, what a first-time player might experience playing this game. And the absolute magic with that is that it creates a one-to-one analogy with what Link in the story is actually experiencing. Which, I mean, is that not exactly what a story writer who's writing a silent protagonist wants to create?
Yeah.
Right? This complete analogy so that you understand the character, because you are literally experiencing just the same amount of frustration and wanting and yearning as the character, because it's like dangling a carrot in front of you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like you're missing out because he's not saying anything. You're just sort of experiencing things the way he experiences them. And that sort of gives you more of a personal reason to get through the game and to get through the dungeons and all that.
Yeah, it really does. I think we had a previous podcast on Okami, which also had a silent protagonist. Mm-hmm. And it was used for a very different purpose in that game. It wasn't like, oh, here's the silent protagonist, but, you know, you can see yourself in this character. Like, no, I think Ami, the wolf, had a very defined personality, you know? Just her sassiness and her attitude. And, you know, it's not like something where we need to create this complete connection between us and the character, even though we do. We do feel a connection to the wolf, but, like, it's not like Link. And Link's whole thing is, like, you can even name Link whatever you want. Like, you can name Link your own name, because we want to create a literal as one-to-one of a connection between the player and Link as possible. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of times in the series, they just kind of say that and don't actually do anything meaningful to enact that. and that's not a bad thing. Like, I like being able to, you know, kill people under the name of Sky. That's cool. I should have said save the world. I shouldn't have said kill people.
It's a video game. It's fine.
Yeah. But in Skyward Sword, it's this wonderful scenario where, like, oh, I want to chase the girl that I like, and I can't because of some greater thing. And it's like, but I just want her. And it's this beautiful analogy, because it's such a simple story. That's another way that Skyward Sword is just wonderful with its story. It's so much more human, you know? Like, just this, it's a love story. And I feel like there's always a lot of value in inserting a good love story, blending a good love story with some grand legacy. It creates a connection.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about the love aspect. So we've talked about how, like, finding Zelda is really Link's motivation, and how much they've both sacrificed and everything. And I think it's worth pointing out that they try so hard and they make all these sacrifices because of love, because of how much they love each other. It's not just that Zelda wants to protect the world. It's also because this is the world that she's lived in, and she has genuine love for the people around her, the people from her village, and especially for Link. And that's why she kind of sacrifices herself and, you know, crystallizes and all that. And Link, of course, the whole reason he goes on this journey, the whole reason he makes all these sacrifices is because he loves Zelda, and he is trying his hardest to catch up with her and to keep her safe and to protect her from everything that's trying to get at her, basically. So at the end of the day, I think you really can say that Skyward Sword is a love story. And what could be more relatable or more poignant than love?
what can be more poignant than love? And I feel like these two characters are also written in a way that allows us to see ourselves in them more. Like, back to what I was saying about, like, you know, having to leave for some higher purpose. Zelda isn't a damsel in distress in Skyward Sword. She's simply pulled away from Link because a greater purpose has been thrust upon her. I really actually like that college analogy I made earlier. Because that's kind of what's happening. You're burdened by what you need to do and not what you want to do. You have this responsibility and you need to face the consequences of it. And every time I want to explain this to you, an opportunity arises and I'm taken away. And it's like, it's something very simple, you know? And in integrating something so simple into this grand story, you kind of need to do that, you know? And it's the best. It is the absolute best.
For sure. Are there any final takeaways that you would like to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, one other thing I want to say. I want to make myself clear and say I'm not saying Skyward Sword's the only game that did well and all the others suck. That's not what I'm saying. The whole series is awesome. In fact, I would say that Skyward Sword kind of just showed us the best parts of these characters. You know what I mean? And with the recent Breath of the Wild game, it actually does something else that's really cool with Zelda. It shows that she's not just a princess. No, she has these, like, you know, desires to research, and she has this sense of agency, and I think that's absolutely beautiful. But it takes such a, what you said, a poignant love story to show us what they want and what they need, and just showing their small place in this grand world. And it's one of those things that whether you're playing the game when it first came out, when we were like 11 and 14 and whatever, or whether you're like 30 or 50, it's like, you know, it's one of those things that makes it so clear why the Zelda series is so dang timeless and universal. For
sure. I think the only thing I would add to that is this game has been a little debated between fans because it did originally come out on the Wii, and this was the first time when you had motion controls for, like, actually going about as Link. So I just wanted to say, if you've heard about any of that and it kind of turns you off from playing it, I would say don't let that be the deciding factor, because I think the game is definitely worth playing, especially for its story. That's not to say that the rest of it isn't enjoyable, because it does have some very cool dungeons and puzzles and all of that stuff. Some of the best, yeah. But if that aspect of playing the games worries you, they did, as we mentioned, come out with Skyward Sword HD, and you can play that on the Switch in handheld mode that you don't have to worry about the motion aspects and can try it in a different format.
Yeah, totally forgot. And I think that's part of the reason why it sold so dang well, despite having come out for several less years than the Wii version.
Yes.
Accessibility.
For sure. I think that's all I wanted to say, so...
Yep.
We really hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast on Skyward Sword. If you'd like to try the game out for yourself, it's available on both the Wii and the Switch. I've been your host, researcher, and editor, Clare Rivetti, and I want to thank our other host, Sky, here for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed my time here. And we hope you'll tune in next time on Screen Stories.